Welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a good break, some coffee, bathroom, whatever it is that you needed. For those of you new to FITC, welcome. If you're unfamiliar with what we do, FITC produces design and technology events focused on. Okay, I haven't had enough coffee. They produce design and technology focused events worldwide and have been putting together events small and large since 2002. Web Unleashed is a front end focused event we've been producing for 10 years, and I have had the pleasure of being a part of, I think, at least 7 of them. And we're really proud to be hosting another one this year, even if it does have to be virtually. It could never be done without the help and support of our sponsors, industry partners, and most importantly, everybody here today. I've been involved in a lot of remote conferences over the last year and a half, and this is consistently both years that I've done it been the best attended, and really the smoothest run. So amazing kudos to all of you for coming. Thank you, and to the event team for doing such an incredibly good job. So we're going to be moving into our next session with Sananda Dutta and Jason Santos. They are coming to us from Rangle in Toronto. Now, Sananda is a senior product designer in Toronto. She's passionate about human-centered design, and she recently completed a master's degree with a specialization in digital futures, empathic design, and UX design. And I really wish that I could spend the rest of this time asking her questions about what a program like that entails. But she's going to be joined by Jason Santos, a senior leader in the technology group at Rangle, where he's responsible for mentoring teams, solutioning, providing technical expertise across Wrangle's diverse client portfolio, and together they're going to demonstrate that a focus on process is more important than the pieces that make up a design system, as those pieces are going to change over its lifetime. And this is very near and dear to my heart, so I can't wait to see what they have to say. Please welcome Sananda and Jason.
Hello, hello. Glad
Hello,
to be here.
everyone.
So we're going to talk about change, of course, and we're super glad to be here. So when we started preparing this talk some time ago, Sananda and I started discussing that this is sometimes hard to talk about, right? Because it's kind of a little bit more abstract than like talking about components and CSS and how you use these or that, right? So we try to came up with a good metaphor to like demonstrate how you can build your design system with change in mind, right? And you're like, okay, let's do it in a way that empowers us to demonstrate how you need the changes to be fast, but also to be cohesive. And I'm big into science fiction. I'm a big nerd, as you can probably imagine. And I talked to Sananda, okay, we need to find a metaphor. I was thinking maybe spaceships. Sananda, what are you into? And she was like, oh, sports. I was like, okay. Now, what can we do as a sports metaphor, right? That can actually convey the idea we wanted. And the analogy ended up being quite nice. We thought about Formula One. Formula One is great as a metaphor for a design system because it's a very cohesive structure that where all the pieces need to fit together. And it's great on innovation. You can see like in this slide, it starts with this horse that is not how Formula One started. But it represents a famous saying of Enzo Ferrari, like the horse pulls, not pushes the cart. He was talking about the front motor on the car. Like he would refuse the idea that motor could be in the back until 1957, when Cooper introduced the rear motor and the car went really well to the point that Jack Brabham won the championship on 1959. So there's lots of changes in Formula One, though. So that's why it's such a powerful metaphor for design systems, right? We had like the double valve engine changing the design of cars forever, starting on the Lotus 49 in 67. Then the design of the actual car started changes when Lotus 78 completely changed the aerodynamics. we have some things introduced that were not super visible, but were critical, like the carbon fiber monocoque that changed the weight of the cars. Like, and nobody wanted to adopt that because it sounded fragile until like John Watson crashed and just walked from the car. And even tiny changes can make big impacts on like a championship, like Benetton's nose change. It just raised the nose a little bit, and now the aerodynamics significantly improved. And a few years later, everyone was adopting it. Like, so lots of changes, and the changes themselves are come from multiple directions. Like the technology changes, competition everywhere, your own goals as a car manufacturer evolve. You have like people just having great ideas, and the championship has rules that change almost every year. Remind you of something, like design systems are just like that. And another thing that really plays into it is that the changes are not random, right? They're part of a cohesive system, a system that looks into it, into the whole of the championship, in the whole of the ecosystem, from multiple directions, multiple dimensions, and multiple disciplines. And what guides those are outcomes, like winning a race or winning the championship, but not only in the sport. Well, the thing we need to remember, that is same thing that happens in the design system happens here, right? You're building that product with it, but you're not just doing that. There's an outreach, there's an impact that goes beyond that thing. And the same thing with the cars. Like the car you drive today benefits from technology that was invented for Formula One by the manufacturers, and they know that, right? That's why they participate on it. At Rangle, we usually face a very interesting challenge, right? A very interesting challenge when we are faced with several different design systems or products, or any problem we're trying to solve, right? We need to go there and think how to solve it, create the infrastructure for it, then establish like a process to make sure that thing is driving the proper value to everybody that's involved and to the ecosystem, right? These things need to be done from scratch from time to time, because there's like different circumstances and all that. In 2019, we started thinking maybe there's something we can make that will like make us start from a different standpoint and not from scratch. And then we started looking at a design system accelerator. It was a great success. Everybody loved it. It started with a design kit that we maintained in Figma. That was the tool everybody loved. We built a React component that was the framework everybody loved, and used TypeScript, the language most people love. And we use CSS and JS using style components, and the love of that moment that was styled systems, right? We use Storybook that everybody loves for both documentation and developer sandbox that would allow people to experiment and all that. And we baked all the visual regression tests to ensure quality into a CI/CD pipeline that will then publish in Storybook the results every time after something changed. But what happens when the rules of the championship changes, right? It's like we baked a lot of our opinions into radios in 2019, the things we brought from the changes we've made before 2019. But on 2020, we used it, and we've done design systems that didn't use radios as a basis many times. And we started seeing changes that will require us to rethink how radios was supposed to go. And then we started thinking, okay, how can we make this infrastructure more resilient to change and be able to look into the future, right? We had to take a step back and start thinking, okay, what are the cars made of, right? What are the pieces that make it? And this starts with looking deep into design, right, Sananda?
Yep, Jason. So taking the baton over from Jason and looking at all the components that form the car that we're about to design, let's get on to what design systems are actually. And I think we have like a slide that we had given to all of you guys to fill up. I think we have the results somewhere. And can we like project it on the screen?
I think you can continue and it's going to pop
Okay.
up.
So let's talk about design systems. So design systems is something which is not only talking about design language, the design kit, the component library, the developer sandbox, and the documentation, but it's more like a shared principle set that defines how patterns are interconnected. And this sort of defines the digital products that you're going to create in the future. Why do you really need design systems? And to sort of emphasize on this, I would say that you have these smaller components that help you define a bigger group of patterns and like an element entirely, which would act as a single source of truth for you. With newer and newer developments in terms of tools, technologies, we need to have the design system in order to have it ever evolving. Design system is something that is pretty unique. It's like it's created for you based on your brand values, based on the principles and the constraints that you set. So it's one of a kind for you. It also helps you maintain visual consistency across different platforms that you use across. It helps bridge gaps between teams because there are a lot of stakeholders that you have whom you need to interact with, and also different teams like developers, designers, content managers who work together. And it helps to sort of have that collaboration between them. Design systems is also easier for scaling when you want to look into the future prospect of bringing in a brand and business value into it. Scaling is something that definitely comes into the picture. And definitely faster iterations. When you want to make changes in terms of what you want to build, these iterations take lesser time, and it also helps you to step up the process. How can you really do it? Like we will now look at what are the steps that you need to look into before building a design system. You have the market research where you have interviews, surveys, requirement gatherings, which help you in order to sort of have the building blocks of the design system. Engaging your stakeholders, assessing them, defining the scope, assumptions, that is something very crucial when you bring on or start with a design system. Defining the business and brand value. You need to set the alignment of how your brand is going to look like, striving to maintain brand uniformity across different platforms. Trying to solve a problem. You need to have a problem which you need to find a solution for, and in that aspect, building a design system or basically having that goal in mind is very important. And the value system, which is the set of principles that will help you define the skeleton of your design system. And this stage helps you in the model manifestation, whether you want something which is open source or you want something that is privatized. So looking into these aspects is also important before you start building a design system. Design system is looking into building the future. And here we actually have to think about the next steps of how to create something. The point of focus here, if I were to use the use case of when we started building Radius 2.0, we wanted to adapt to change and we wanted to revamp Radius. So we did like a visual audit. We looked at the existing design tokens, elements, patterns, recreated some well-known websites, tried to do a stress test and see what lacked in our design system. We revamped the visual language, the spacing, grid structure, typography, which we'll show you later. We added some elements because we felt that we wanted to make Radius something which is like a reusable factor where you don't have to create stuff, but if you don't want to use something, then that's better than creating something new into the system. Also looking into the taxonomy, the proper nomenclature of things based on semantics. And one of the key and crucial important things here would be the documentation, which is the usage, setting the accessibility standards, and defining the themes that you're going to use. And our learning in this process was taken into the design system playbook, which I'm going to show you, where we actually created. Yeah. So this is the link for the Radius 2.0, where we have our values and our learning set up. So you can go to radius.ranglelabs.io and have a look. And this is our learnings, the playbook that we looked into, where if you see, we were defining the focus on aligning why do we need change and basically working on that. And here we have the value hypothesis, the growth hypothesis, the acceleration, and the future state. Once you define or align yourself to why you need a design system, the next step is to see what business value you want to bring in. And here we have the why and the what, finally defining the future state, which is the path forward. So you have to test the design system with real users. You have to define that value. You have to test the growth. You have to validate the growth, where you see whether you meet the needs of the diverse groups in product teams, and also looking at the overall product to adoption fit, which will eventually help you in supporting the product teams and adapting to the new system of work. And this is in line with what we are looking into as design system scaling. And Jason would like to take you further on this journey.
Yeah, the playbook was crucial for us, right? We started looking into merging our experience building design systems at larger scales and baking those into the structure of Radius, because you can change colors and typography, but how do you go about changing the structure? Like once you need new contexts for different voices within the same design system while maintaining the cohesion, right? The essential structure you build is not super important, right? There are some key elements though, right? You need to start working at the right level, right? You can't just build a component library in the group within a group of developers and expect it to be able to do these things, right? You need to have the conversations at the right spot. For us, typically, we see that the right spot is the portfolio level of the company, right? Because then you will have the design system really as a first-class product, or the first-class citizen capable of making this transit and having the right constraints behind it. For that, you also need the right team. You need the right people involved. And that can be hard, especially when you bridge products, right? So you need the right people there. And at the end, the right decision, that's essentially to allow these decisions to change, to really make the flow an easy flow, right? The ability to scale, the ability to accelerate things depend on your ability to change your mind. This reminded me a lot every time I worked with the design system, reminded me of the rest of the work with software architecture, right? A design system reminds me in its needs of an evolutionary architecture, right? It has some of the same things, some of the same key elements that make it work better, right? Well-defined modules, like create these structures that will allow you to make changes to one and not immediately trickle down implications if those implications are not supposed to be automatic. Like it needs to be designed focused on business capabilities, right? You can't just imagine the car without thinking what type of championship it's going to run. And it needs to have the capability for reversing your direction, to making sure you can plug a piece out and put another piece in and everything continues to work. right? This will empower you to go really fast in your experimentation, and that was going to give you the best product at the end, the best structure at the end, right? If you look at the structure of how decisions usually trickle down in the design system, it stems from the brand identity into a style guide, then like composing a design kit with some visual components, and at the end it empowers people to build user features. Like, it's usually very good at reducing the cost of building the things lower down, and utilizing the specialized knowledge that exists in each one of these places, uh, allows you to optimize each one of these steps, and make sure the decisions that are made by brand are really used downwards in the style guide and so on, right? But we started thinking that this is too rigid. The model itself makes you think that you're going into one direction. Another way we started thinking about this was as a decision pyramid. Since I was the one who drew this chart, it looks more like a decision pine tree, but you get the idea, right? It stems from business value, because otherwise you can just buy a component library elsewhere. If you are really looking at creating value for your brand, creating that real problem, to address that real problem in the business, right? It needs to start dialoguing with the business value very strongly, right? And then it trickles down to all the other elements. But what happens is, if it's centered in portfolio, right, and has every discipline together doing it, it really will make changes oriented to the right problems. The other thing is that it needs to be optimized for flow, right? The moment you start moving down, but not being able to move up and trigger new decisions based on new information you found, you will have less ability to change direction, right? Being able to really leverage your tooling to make sure everything works fine is going to be key here, right? And the tooling will empower you to relentlessly move things from left to right, and then moving information from right to left, right? And one thing we found is that there is something to be said about ecosystem that controls their own tools, right? Having tools that you can customize, having tools that can really respond to the things you need instead of you having to adapt to them, can empower you to really solve the problems you have instead of just having to accept the flow the way it is. Now I think we're gonna have a sneak peek on the results of some of these work. We're still right in the middle of it, right? So there's not like a huge lot of things to show, but there's things we discovered that we can show you a little bit, right, Sananda?
Yep. So looking at the design side of things, here is a small preview of what we've been working at with Radius 2.0. So if you see here, we have some of the things that actually define Radius, and taking you directly to the design tokens, we have the grids, the typography, the colors, the elevation shadows, spacing, and image opacities. And let's look at grid in detail a bit. So here you see we've sort of put them across different breakpoints, and also define them based on how much gutter spacing and column width it's going to be looking like. And taking things from there, looking into the color side of things, giving you a glimpse of how we define the brand colors for Radius, looking at Rangle, and then having the primary, secondary, the UI, the background, and the text colors defined. One of the key things we had to take a dig at was typography, where the developers and designers decided to have the typography scale based on t-shirt sizing, which was lesser options to pick from. And then here we had the typography scale defined, where we had 5XL to XS and different breakpoints from which you can see here, you can take reference from. So the heading 1 and the heading 1 for the different breakpoints is different. Coming to buttons, a component we designed, here you can see we have the base component, which is the master component, and then we have the different variants across different themes. So you see here the base component, it has 2 different stylings. Pulling in an asset from the Figma library, you see how we can alter it based on if you want an icon or if you want it to be responsive or not, things like that. And the advantage of having a master component is that you can always change things in the master, which will always reflect in your variants. So it's basically just one place where you can make a change and it reflects everywhere. Lesser work, time saved. So let's get on to the development side of things now. Jason?
Yeah, this the ability to really make changes was the key here, right? So this more than just a way of doing things, we wanted to be fast. So Figma really and got us excited when we published an API we could use to grab all the data from the Figma files and nodes directly into the development structure, right? For that, we thought, okay, we need like a way of doing this, but we don't want it to be super like strict, right? So we created like a structure that was a command line tool. And the first command that we started building was like a style generator. We envisioned other commands and other things, but we didn't want to make it super bloated, right? We started like building the first one. That was the style. It was not too long ago. It's still in the very early stages. The thing it can do is that it directly goes into that Figma file and it extracts the styles. It's still with the logs on, so that bear with me. So, and it generates us in this new structure for radius that we're starting to work on. We'll publish it soon. So it generates styles as a separate thing that can now be consumed across the 3 component libraries we're aiming, right? The Angular, the React, and the web components, stencil-based web components. We have the Angular one up. Those are the one that's working right now, but it's still very early. We still just have a few components with it. As you can see, we're using directives to do it. The current stage gave us some really good learnings. And one of them was that the designers were actually having a bit of friction to do all the things they needed to do in Figma to really land us with the design tokens with the proper conventions that we wanted. So we started thinking maybe we could remove some of the burden from it. And then we went back up the pyramid and started looking into, that's the thing we're working on now, a Figma plugin that will plug into the whole process and empower the designers to actually start giving some reduced work, having some reduced workload to make sure this flow happens in a smooth way. If you want to know more, we have this website up that has some information on Radius, the new version anyway, and we're planning to give you a deeper view on this still in Q4 and like publish most of this code as open source. I think that's it. I think we will open for Q&A now.
Oh, that was fantastic and so topical. I don't know if you caught this previously, but I just started about 3 weeks ago at Chewy.com here in the US as the principal designer on their design systems team. And I'm currently working through figuring out design tokens in our Figma files. So couldn't be more relevant right now. But we do have some really great questions, so I won't completely take over the Q&A section for my own personal benefit. But I think you touched on some things that I have often seen be a real challenge in companies, and that is, who is the sponsor? So in thinking through, like, is it somebody more leading the engineering side, or somebody in the business, somebody in the design side. I've seen it handled well and poorly in all of these, and I kind of have my own thoughts on it. But I'm wondering if I could hear from the two of you, like where you've seen the greatest success, or maybe the biggest pitfalls in who owns the design system.
Well, if I can take this real quick, Sananda maybe can give her take on it later.
Yeah.
That varies a lot from the ecosystem, and that's one thing what happened when we were starting to build this presentation, and I actually forgot to say when I was doing the talk, was that some of these categories, some of these levels, they work only in certain ecosystems and they don't work on others. So don't copy our levels. Don't copy. You need to figure these things for yourself. Some companies will have a lot of big organizational knowledge in one department, and this department will have built those bridges that it needs to have to make sure flow works, right? Some in other organizations, that department is a little less connected. So the leadership in that department will be less effective in leading a huge cross business, cross portfolio thing like a design system, right? So this will vary a lot. But there are some elements that need to exist, right? That you need to have a group of people, to have at least the sponsor needs to have a close contact and at least a very good relationship with design and engineering, for example. And it also needs to be connected with the business value from the strategic perspective. So without these three elements, it's really hard for that person to transit and be effective.
That you really got right in on the thing that I wanted to focus in on. So thank you. That worked perfectly. It totally failed yesterday when I tried to set up a question like that. But I think too often I've seen a design system really being a misnomer. It's really being treated as a developer convenience system to make things more consistent. And I think that ties into another one of the questions. You use the phrase portfolio level or portfolio centric kind of thing. And I think I'm understanding better what you mean by that, as it needs to be just as important as design and technology, but not subservient to one of those things. Am I interpreting your intent that way? Is that what you meant by that phrase?
Yes, and there's another thing, right? It's when you look at a design system on large scale, it's different from when you have this one website that you want to build a design system for, right? Or this one product, right? If you have a design system as a tool to reinforce the brand, right, to make your brand consistent, to make your brand increase its equity, right? You need to really make sure you treat this as a product itself, right? It's treated with respect. It has a name. It has a place in the minds of the teams across the company. It's not something you NPM install, right? It needs to have a life of its own. So someone who is under technology will have a lot of difficulty making it happen and pushing it upwards in an organization. What do you think, Sananda?
I totally have to agree with you. And we've actually seen that happening. And we've sort of jumped that hurdle and solved this issue where we are working more like as a team. And there is like a proper feedback contribution mechanism that works within our system where we are all in sync. And that really helps us to take things forward in a more uniform manner.
That's great. And I should add that was a question that I pulled from the chat from Sally. I really appreciate that. We've had a few great additional questions come in. Andrew asked one that is this, like, we could spend the rest of the day talking about this. Strategies to sell the importance of good design. He asked for your clients, but I think you're talking really about within your organization. So let's scope it to say whether it's your client or it's your boss, sort of the same kind of thing. let's spend a few minutes talking about that, because I think I've got my thoughts, obviously, but I think, what are your go-to strategies for helping communicate the value of this to people who might not otherwise be really mindful of the importance of I'm really thinking about the design side of this and then connecting that to outcomes for a business?
Well, I think it starts with having the proper concerns in mind, right? Like, it's, if you're approaching someone who is not involved in starting to understand or building the problems that you're trying to solve, there's something wrong there already, right? It's a matter of where the solution starts, and with whom starts, like we said, like the right level and the right people, right? We need uh, um, leadership from the interested parts to be part of defining the problem, right? It's a conversation that spans not only the way you are going to design things, but also why you're designing things, right? But why aren't you just npm installing material design if you're not solving a design problem, right?
Yeah, so more often than not, like I would say one of the crucial things to align or define the whys is actually looking at the stakeholders and basically reading their mind, what they want, and aligning those values with what you're about to create. And also having clarity in terms of the problem that is being solved, because every organization is going to have like a unique problem where there are multiple groups working together and you need to come up with a solution. So for that, having everybody on board, everybody's goals aligned, is something that would make things go or reach further in as you know progress with the design
Mm-hmm.
system and make changes to it. So definitely I would say that the why and the what, if
Mm-hmm.
everybody is on the same page, that makes a lot of difference.
That's fantastic. It reminds me of, I don't know if you've seen books from A Book Apart by Mike Montero. The first one that he published was called Design as a Job. And I don't always love the language or the terminology that he uses, but he had the phrasing in there, like, if you haven't sold your boss, your team, your colleagues on this idea, this design system, this approach, then you're not done designing yet. And I think that's something that we often forget, especially for us designers, when we need to apply the same thinking when we are examining this problem and explaining it to our bosses and colleagues, as we do when we're trying to solve a problem for an end user. If we can't connect it to concrete metrics and outcomes, then we don't understand the problem well enough to say it's going to solve anything. So I can't thank you both enough for bringing that up and bringing it to the fore, because I think that why and that what is so critical. It doesn't matter if it's an external client or inside your organization. That is, I think, the most important thing that we can all start with. So thank you for that. Um, I want to call out, Dayton had mentioned something in the chat, and this was actually something that I've just started playing around with at Chewy, is the Figma plugin, Figma Tokens, has been a really interesting thing to work with, and that's being extended all the time too. So I'd love to check out the things that you've been working on, Jason, and see how these things interconnect, because I think a lot of people are struggling with finding that right balance between working in the design tooling and then connecting that with engineering and keeping those things in sync. So I wanted to call that out as another thing for people to take a look at, but then also pivot to another question that we got from Raphael, which is that future of that tooling. So, we know that. So I'll take a step back. I've never hired a designer in over 20 years who couldn't write HTML and CSS. They may not do it for a living, but it's critical to me that they understand enough about the stuff in which we're delivering our interfaces to really be able to design effectively. But that also is a difficult thing to scale out in a large organization when you've got 50 product designers working on things and having everybody kind of on that same page. So you've found a way with Figma, and I think it's a great tool. What do you see as the next thing or the next evolution, whether it's in Figma or somewhere else, in keeping everybody working together on that same page?
Yeah, this I think it's similar to the evolution of everything else, right? You tools that allow you to grab images and structures and drag them into a page and setting properties and making the end result available as HTML are pretty old. Like you remember Dreamweaver, right? And it's the tools, the things the tools do are not the key thing, right? It's the key is what is those tools empowering, right? I think we are seeing a moment now where we're starting to pay attention to the actual flow from the business problem to the code, and seeing the value of data coming back from real users, code, and everything else that's connected to the ecosystem back into all the decisioning all the way up, right? You can just npm install or install a tool and it's gonna be fantastic going forward. But by taking a little bit of control, you don't need to like build the most fantastic clone of whatever tool you're using, right? Yourself. But sometimes, like we said, like having a connective tissue of little tools you control there allows you to like maybe empower data to come back. Right. One thing that the people have been saying all over the place is that when you are a developer, you're there writing your code, you hit like control space or command space, and then you see like a list of things that can be done. We're yet to see some of these for design tools. We're yet to see some of these informing the designers how much that component that he just did is costing the developers to do in real time, for example. So he was, maybe I won't do it like this, or how many defects it had, whether or not users are interacting with it. Maybe though that type of information is not super hard. That's one of the things when we were discussing this improvements we're making is like these from an engineering perspective, these are not expensive. These are ridiculous. Like just a few days you can build these things. The thing is, what are we aiming at? What are you learning? What do you want to learn from these things, and how are we going to change them to fit like a better process, a better flow of information up and down the pyramid?
So, Sananda, I'd love to follow up with this with you. So, as a designer, with all of these things in mind, do you feel that your ability to design freely, because this is often the constraint or the thing that people wave their hands around and say, oh, well, if you understand too much code, then you're never going to design, and you're going to design to what you know. So how do you feel about that? With the introduction of all of these integrations, how do you feel? What kind of impact has it had on your flexibility as a designer?
Well, like we have come across this situation when we were actually looking at typography. And I would say initially looking at things where you have to align them in a certain way was difficult because a lot of us are not used to that. But you see the benefit you have in the longer run because everything is so organized. There's a hierarchy that's maintained, and it's easier when you want to create a plugin or a tool which pulls data from Figma and then it works, or it's basically taking things and pushing it onto Storybook, let's say, for documentation reasons. So eventually we have to definitely look at the greater good in terms of when different teams are collaborating and working. If it helps the life of a developer, a content manager, or somebody in the business team, And it does bring a certain sense of uniformity and hierarchy into the organization of things. I am definitely going to say, like, be pro to it. Like, I would definitely agree to adopting that, because eventually it's going to cut time in the implementation process.
Right. And I have to pause and just give you kudos for having a responsive typographic scale in your design system, because most don't. And so that's certainly something that's been near and dear to my heart for many, many years, as a few people have heard me rant on about. So really lovely work on that. And thank you so much, both of you, for imparting a lot of really useful tips and tidbits and frameworks for people to think about this stuff. Because I think many of us are struggling with a lot of these same challenges. And thank you again to everybody who has been putting in so many great questions. We had a couple of really interesting polls in there. I wish we had more time to talk about them, but make sure you check those things out when you have a chance. And make sure you check out all the amazing work that Rangle is doing. Thank you both so much. Wow, we have had some amazing sessions today. This has just been awesome. So thank you once again to both of you and to Rangle for being such a great supporter of the event for many years now. I've met a ton of great people from Rangle over the years. That was great. We are now going to be taking a 40-minute break, grab some food, and check out some of the awesome activities that we have lined up for you. A lot of you use Postman, and last month they released V9 of their API platform. You can see what's new going on there. We also have a fireside chat with Andrea McBride, the VP of Digital Development and Support at RBC. She's also a chair for Women in Digital, so make sure you check that out. And Rangle is hosting a web accessibility AMA, which, man, accessibility built well into design systems can go such a long way to avoiding the need for those terrible overlay solutions that people try to bolt on at the end of the day. So make sure you check all of those activities out. Enjoy the break. Same as yesterday, we'll be ending this AM broadcast during the break, but don't worry, we're going to push you into the next virtual session room so you don't have to do anything. If for any reason that doesn't work, or you close out the browser window and come back in, just make sure you click on the schedule at the top left corner of the screen and select Day 2 PM sessions. We will see you soon. Thanks, everyone.